Hey guys, it's Q&A Tuesday. First question coming in from Johnny, Joni. I'm assuming that's pronounced Johnny. Johnny 26. Hey Roman, great video. My question, does Patek Philippe allow you to put your own name on their watches as Rexhep Rexhepi has done, and is that something common? To answer your question in short, no. Patek Philippe will not allow to put your name on it. In fact, the only Patek Philippe's you see out there with other company names out there would be like the Tiffany Patek Philippe's, which they're regular editions, except they're sold through Tiffany and Company exclusively, and it has the name Tiffany & Co. across, and those Pateks trade at 30 to 40% over the price of that same edition that is regular. And God forbid you get that on a super hot watch like a stainless steel Nautilus, it trades through the roof. I've seen a rose gold 5711 plain Nautilus with a Tiffany dial sell at double its retail value. I mean, it's that hot. So no, Patek Philippe will never allow you to put your name on their watches. I don't care who you are. Now, I mean, maybe if Bill Gates, or not that he ever would, he doesn't care for these fancy things, or somebody super duper famous or iconic like the President of the United States of America or something asked them to do so, I'm sure they would, because they know they would never resell that watch. But even then, I don't think that would actually do that. I just don't see them doing it, especially on the front of the watch. But you talked about Rexhepi, a name that's very difficult to pronounce. Kid from Kosovo that somewhat shook up the watch world, an independent watchmaker, born in 1987 in Kosovo, and his parents migrated to Geneva in the 90s to run away from the war that was going on over there. Again, not going to get into history of that, but when he was a kid, his father traveled often, and oftentimes he would come back home with a Swiss-made watch on his wrist. He got so infatuated with watches and the physical location that it was in around all these manufacturers. At the early age of 14, he applied to Patek Philippe's watchmaking school at the young age of 15, believe it or not. It really opened up his eyes to, you know, what true traditional watchmaking was all about. I think he did 3 years as an apprentice there, and he went to work in the regular production line. I guess at the time he was 18 years old. That's pretty darn young, if you ask me. He only worked at Patek Philippe for 2 years, and then he moved on to B&B Concept, which was a company that made highly conceptual and funky movements, a lot of the stuff that you see independents do today. There he succeeded very, very quickly. I think it's only in a matter of a couple of years where he was in charge of a team of like 10 people and was really the lead watchmaker there, because there are ways to take traditional watchmaking and make it untraditional while still utilizing a lot of the traditional watchmaking techniques, which made him a beast of horology, if you ask me. I'm going to quote what he said. At Patek Philippe, I learned about tradition. Working at B&B opened up my eyes to the fact that there were new ways of utilizing those traditions for the development of new creations. This is what he said about the time that he was there. Of course, after B&B, he was jonesing for something new, something different, and he applied for a bench at F. Journe. He successfully got the position. He was only there for about 18 months. After that, he bounced around with a few consulting gigs, truly trying to find his spot or his place in horology. This is a young kid that's doing this. So finally in 2012, he established his own company, Akrivia. And I'll throw a few of their pieces up there. 2012, the kid was 25 years old at the time, and he opened up his new Swiss brand. The brand is still around today. It's successful. He's a well-respected independent watchmaker. A lot of the older manufacturers, as well as other older independent watchmakers, respect him extremely well. And he's also the guy that will allow you to put your name on his watch, because he's not as snooty as Patek Philippe or some of the other major brand manufacturers. I know I already answered your question, but you kind of opened up the gate for me to talk about Rexhepi, probably one of the most unpronounceable names in the business, and his watch brand, Akrivia. Akrivia, by the way, is a Greek word for precision, in case you guys didn't know. Maybe I'll get one of his watches on here, and I'll do a what's on my desk. This question or episode is really not about Akrivia watches, so I just kind of got into it based on the question that Johnny asked me. Next question is from Yu Chang. Hey Roman, can you perhaps recommend any Patek watch which is really an iconic Patek watch, recognizable to people, ranges between 100 to 150K? I'll even give you one better. Today, some of the older collectibles kind of drop down in prices, and I'm specifically going to talk about the perpetual chronographs. So starting with the 3970s, and they have yellow gold, rose gold, and platinum, as well as the 5970s, and again, rose, yellow, and platinum. You're going to pick up the 3970s under 100, and some of them way under 100. You can pick up yellows nowadays for around 70,000. These watches used to trade around 120 to even $150,000. The 5970s, which was the next version, you can pick up around that $100,000 price range, a little less, a little more, depending on the metal, as well as the current ones, the 5270s. The white gold 5270s are trading in that $120,000 price range. And those are really iconic pieces, and Patek Philippe is not going to stop with production of their perpetual calendar chronographs, which they consider part of their grand complication collection. So those are very, very iconic watches. And really you can pick those based on the size of your wrist. The 3970 is going to be the smallest out of the three, then the 5970, the 5270, which is the biggest one out there. But my rule of thumb is the older the better, because again, 3970 was produced quite a few years ago, and it's already a collectible. It's only a matter of time until that goes back up in value. Because if you go back further to some of the perpetual calendars, some of the older chronographs that Patek makes, those are the ones that fetch all the results in auctions today. And just because it's not hot at the moment doesn't mean that that lost its appeal or its iconicism. Is that even a word? I'm not even sure. And one more watch I'll mention too that's worth picking up right there is the Celestial, the 5102, the older one, not the 6102, which is the current model, because you can pick those up around that $150,000 price range, maybe even less depending on the metal. And that is definitely an iconic watch from Patek Philippe. Next question is from George Jace. Great episode as usual, Roman. Thank you. Do you feel that retro watch renaissance that has been going on in watches like Fox Patina and etc., do you feel it's time for more innovation than looking back? I feel it's time that Rolex should do something else and make a new GMT variation. And it looks like Tudor is going back to the Submariner. I like the direction AP is going by taking chances with 1159 line. I'd like to get your take on these subjects. Always great content on your channel. Thanks again. I don't mind companies going back and reintroducing older stuff. The Rolex GMT, you're not getting innovative. They just swap bracelets. I mean, really, that's all they did. Oyster bracelet versus Jubilee bracelet, same exact watch. But in the case of a Tudor, going back to the older style Submariners and making the new watches that are made to look like older Paul Newman Daytonas, I don't really mind that. And the reason I don't mind that is because I'm biased. I like vintage watches, and any of those remakes or anything that brings back history from older times, I really don't mind. And rightfully so. If you're a company of 100+ years and you have the history to go back to, why not do that? Much like the Reversa did a tribute, much like IWC just recently did a tribute to the Da Vinci Perpetual. All those things I really don't mind at all, because the companies do have that history. It's when companies that, and I talked about these companies before, no need to mention any names, that do have history going back to the 1800s because somebody's great-grandfather made a pocket watch at one time or the other. Then they take a 200-year break, and all of a sudden they re-emerge, and they talk about their history going back hundreds of years, and all of a sudden they do a tribute watch. Well, what is that tribute watch to? I don't see any of those older watches out on the market. When the Breguet came out with a Type 20, right, and I talked about that, that's a tribute to a watch that was made in 1952 for the French military that contracted them with a contract number of 20, by the way, hence it's called Type 20, to make military watches for them. I'm okay with that. Breguet has the longevity and the history, so you can find an older piece and a newer piece out in the market today and compare the two side by side. When there's a gap in between and nobody really knows about what they're attributing to, that I actually mind. As far as what you said, AP's direction, I absolutely love that, and I've been talking about that when I reviewed SIHH, when I knocked Panerai for not reinventing themselves and so on. I want to see companies reinvent themselves. I want to see companies taking those chances like AP did with the code 1159. Everybody and their mother complained about the code 1159 and said how crappy it is and how ugly it is. And so guess what? I've sold 3 pieces thus far, and none of them went for under list, and I sold them to dealers, which means that dealer resold it to somebody else over list. I just sold a Perpetual at full pop to a dealer who's going to in turn resell it to somebody else, and that's a $72,000 watch. So go figure. You guys were all screaming how bad it is, and I said it right away. The 1159 is going to kick ass, and it's kicking ass right out of the gate, believe me when I tell you. But back to what you were saying, yes, I absolutely applaud companies in taking those chances. But you have to remember, not all companies can do that or can afford to do that. A company like AP, which is one of the hottest brands right now, they can afford to do that. If AP was, like, let's say, in the shoes of Vacheron Constantin, which not too long ago was the hottest thing on the market, right? But today they're not. They probably wouldn't take as many chances. They would continue sticking with making models that make money for them because that's their main concern. So it's a catch-22. You have to be doing well financially, and you have to be popular and hot on the market in order to be able to take those chances. You can't really blame those guys as well. You gotta do what you gotta do in order to sustain a business, because at the end of the day, these guys are not artists. They're still a business, and most of them are owned by big groups to whom they have to answer when the stock prices plummet. So hope that somewhat answers your questions or concerns. So the next 2 questions is from Malibu Man as well as Mr. Smith, and we can throw them both up on the screen. Malibu Man says, hey Roman, love your videos, thank you. Following one from Rolex part of this, can you explain the benefit to Rolex of cutting production? I get that they create strength in the market, but they do this by limiting their own sales. Sure, great for those lucky enough to get hold of the watches, but what is the point of creating huge demand if you aren't going to satisfy it by releasing pieces? It doesn't seem to make sense unless Rolex themselves are invested in their own used market or possibly their own black market. Or will they release a ton of watches at some point to cash out? And Mr. Smith says, comment and question, great content and insight, keep up. Thank you for your service. You're welcome. I served in the Corps. Amplify. Question, why doesn't Rolex dramatically increase retail prices globally? My thought, this would increase exclusivity, cut down waiting list nonsense, and decrease profit margins for flippers. I'm going to answer both of your questions at the same time, and I've talked about this numerous times already because you guys keep asking that same exact question. You guys have to understand something. If you look at Rolex overall and the amount of different models that they make and the amount of different variations across all models and sizes and everything else, it's a huge line. I don't know how many different watches Rolex makes at the very moment, but if you go on their website, there's hundreds, right? The hot models that trade over list are what? Skydwellers, steel Skydwellers, steel Daytonas, your stainless steel subs, and your stainless steel GMT. Where are those in comparison to the rest of the Rolex world? What percentage do they make up of all the other Rolexes? What, less than 2%, maybe 1%, maybe even less, right? So when you say, hey, why not just release into their market? And as Mr. Smith said, why not just increase prices of them globally? That wouldn't make any sense. It's those very, very few pieces that give such huge brand name recognition to that particular brand that I wouldn't be surprised if they cut production even further. And as far as retail prices, as Mr. Smith said, they're already outrageous. Think in terms of what a GMT retailed for 10 years ago versus what it retails for today. It almost tripled at this point. There's no other brand out there, well, except Richard Mille, that has increased their prices so dramatically. And if you think about, in general, Rolex, especially when it came to their steel line, they were that cheaper alternative always to Swiss watch manufacturing. Rolex subs, when you were able to pick them up for $4,000 or $5,000, those were the affordable Swiss watches, much like a Mega is today still, or a Breitling for that matter. So in terms of prices, they're already gone through the roof. So forget that concept of things. But here I am, I'm a brand. Forget if I'm Rolex, Bolex, or if I'm Luxury Bazaar, right? If today I have a product that's so desirable out on the market, there's a whole nother market gets created behind our flippers and gray market dealers and guys like us and so on and so forth. They trade among each other without these watches even going on a wrist at ridiculous prices. Why would I increase that production? Why would I kill off that hype? It's creating a hype about my brand in general. And what does that do? It makes all my other models a lot more desirable. If 10 years ago somebody wouldn't be caught dead wearing a Datejust, they would just jump up to a sub or a GMT, and the Datejust was quote unquote the poor man's Rolex. That was, by the way, my first very expensive watch. It was an old Datejust that I paid like $1,100 for, right? But now that poor man's Rolex all of a sudden that retails upwards of $6,000 already is selling at pretty much at its retail price. And not because it's that desirable, because the other stuff is so desirable, because the hype on the market is alive, and because everybody and their mother wants that hot Rolex. And if they can't get the hot Rolex, they go to the next best thing or to the thing that they can afford next down the line. So releasing a ton of watches, as you said, into the market, they would be killing themselves. They would be killing their own PR. Why do that? And as far as increasing prices dramatically, as Mr. Smith said, no reason for that either. They have already increased prices dramatically. And guess what? They're going to continue doing so. And they're going to continue doing so for years and years to come, specifically on those hot models. And the only reason those retail prices of $10,000 for GMT seem very reasonable to you is because in the gray market, they're selling for $14,000, $15,000. And that's why all of a sudden that seems reasonable. But it's not, because that was a $4,000 watch not very, very long ago. And it made a humongous jump over the last few years due to the popularity of the brand. So I hope it answers your question, Mr. Smith, and your question, Malibu Man. Well, guys, that's it for me for today. As always, subscribe, like, share this video for those you think may enjoy this content, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday.